A man found a piece of twine and began to roll it up into a small ball. Then he found some more twine and added it to it and began to make the ball larger. Soon the ball of twine was almost the size of the man, and he began to wish he could unravel it. Though for what reason, God only knows. Lungs need not study breathing, nor hearts the pumping of blood. So, what gives a man's mind? Yeah, I know that everything must be fed, but that still evades the question as posed. The historic eras of book burning were but crude external reflections of certain refined internal advances made by mystics. On one world, those who considered themselves intelligent, were required to wear signs hung around their necks so stating their belief. Meanwhile, all those who actually understood anything were scrambling for a way off the planet. Everyone believes that there's something missing, but until you know what your thinking knows, you'll never know what it is. Men drive on highways that they find forever unfinished, not realizing that it is the vehicle in which they travel that creates the condition. Heat said to sweat, "What the hell are you looking at?" It's reputed that life's original plan for man's mind was to have each person's wired up so that they would begin every sentence with the words, "Well, it seems to me." So what do you think happened? What do you mean, nothing? There are mathematical formulas that control the life of man, but since most people are put off by numbers, men have replaced them with ideas of gods and fate. Some improvement, huh? There was once a ship that sailed by sensation, and another which sailed based on thoughtful plotting. Both of them, however, sailed by the same principles and dynamics. There was once a race of creatures who lived on the surface of their world. Then as they evolved, they moved part of their existence underground and gave it a new name. This worked well enough for most, but a few were ultimately disturbed by it, even when not sure why. A man pondered, what was a wolf before he was named Wolf? According to one version of an earthly creation myth, Adam was not driven from paradise by his admission that he had eaten of the forbidden fruit, but rather because when asked about by God, he replied, "I don't feel so good." It's one thing to be dying, and another not to be feeling good. And it's also one thing to realize this is so, yet another entirely to see it as supreme metaphor. One man's theory is that the life of a mystic is just like everyone else's, except in some instances more so, and in others less. He adds that even though this is his theory, and that he has great confidence in it, that even he isn't exactly sure just what it means. "Hey Ralph, look over there. Isn't that the skyline of Istanbul?" "Well, I'm not sure, Waldo. In this mist, it could be just Paris faking it." On one planet, the patent office will not accept ideas for which no physical working model can be made. It is rumored that Earth once considered adopting this approach, but wanting to develop, abandoned it. Two hogs were laying out in the sun, and one of them said, "How can you tell when humans are blowing smoke up your shorts?" And the second one admitted he didn't know and asked how. "Their lips are moving," replied the first. One man believed that he had swallowed Aesop but it turned out to just be a verbal hairball. The matter of residency. You can live in the mountains, you can live in the valleys, and you can live too much in either the mountains or the valleys. There's only one place where you can't live too much at. The neuron doctor received the following letter. Dear sir, do hormones ever die? And the doctor slapped the postman silly for delivering it to the wrong person. The way to determine how civilized you are is by asking yourself, how much of your life do you feel is made up of physical sensations, and how much it consists of thinking? And someone responded, is being civilized the same as being in a restricted state of consciousness? That is, in the condition the mystics often refer to as being asleep, in the dark, imprisoned. How can progress be both progress and non-progress? What kind of man is it who is both a normal man and a non-normal one? And what type of mind is it that can process information and experience as it should, that is, in a manner befitting the civilization in which they live, and yet think of things in ways that belie all routine perceptions? Everyone consists of a multiplicity, often of apparent conflicting factions, but only a few ever clearly realize the situation and thus both add to and subtract from this oh-so-human condition. A certain man once asked himself, who suffers most, a lion with a toothache or a man with a toothache who can also think about it? And who is the more civilized, he who says he is and is not, or he who is and says nothing? And how much, pondered one chap, does talk ultimately have to do with it? A tale of three men. One man moved the furniture around in his house. He moved it once, he moved it twice, he moved it many, many times. So many times, in fact, that he began having trouble taking the furniture from himself. One man wrote a story about him writing a story about himself. And he did it so well that it became difficult to distinguish the story he had written about himself from himself. Another man had a mind, and I see no need to carry this any further since his condition covers both of the stories and situations just described. A bucket said to a dog, "Wouldn't it be wonderful to be empty?" And the canine replied, "I believe you meant to say that to the man with me." Surefire, termite-proof test to determine if you're stupid or not. Simply answer this easy question. Do you take life personally? Just between you and somebody else, the truth is that you're pretty much of a routine dunderhead if you'll submit to taking any type of test anyway. The mayor of a busy city said, "I don't know what to think. Get me the latest polling results." And an aide stated to him that such an approach was unworthy of a man of his position, but thought better of it, remembering that his honor had no sense of humor. Meanwhile, across town, they reconvened a previous noted conference. And in the midst of the speeches, a man in the audience unexpectedly stood and loudly exclaimed, "Hold it! You can forget all of your fine theories and speculations on the matter. It's all suddenly become clear to me." And the chairman struck hard with his gavel, declaring, "Sir, I have told you before that we are professionals here, recognized experts in our field. Things do not suddenly become clear to us. Now sit down and shut up about it." Men peer out in fear of external demons, dragons, and other assorted enemies, so as to not become unacceptably upset over conditions at home. Although this situation is natural to man, he has come to believe otherwise and has invented such things as religion and psychology to help protect him from that from which he actually needs none. Except, of course, in instances wherein he thinks he does. Like in being alive and ordinary. Only the sick can be cured, and they cannot, which helps fuel their illness. Is it any wonder that in the repertoire of the mystical warrior, death is always more popular than merely feeling bad, which is death extended to its ultimate limits. The people in one valley would shout up to those in the mountains, "Why deprive yourself of half the fun of being alive?" And the people in the hills understood that they meant half the fun of being alive and being normal down here. You can spit off the top of a building, but you'll never hit a bird. The speaker threw this question to the crowd: why are there synonyms for all of man's major organs, like blood pump for the heart or organic bellows for the lungs, but not one for the mind? And a voice in the throne called out, "How about thought generator?" And the speaker acted, "Are you kidding me?" There was once a race of creatures who discovered a magical plant which, when eaten, extended their lifespan. But it had a certain side effect. Their longer days became ones of increased apprehension. Rhetorical clarification. A rhetoric clarification. Irony. Bad rap name for coincidence. Coincidence. Misnomer term for things as they are. Although the concept is now far, far removed from its origins, you might be interested to know that suicide was another invention of mystics. In fact, related thereto, consider and ask yourself this: why has life made men so strongly condemn the physical act thereof? What does it fear they might metaphorically suspect if they too long pondered the matter? There was once a band of travelers who began to think of illness as a metaphor for health and death as a symbol for enriched living. Life tried to arrange it so as it'd get lost and be forgotten. The speaker said, "What is it about man that is so special?" And someone in the crowd replied, "You mean besides him thinking that he is?" All went quiet for a spell. Then the speaker picked back up again. "All right then, what is it about man that is so strange?" And a voice from the crowd said, "Same reply." Once upon a time there was a magical kingdom where horses were in charge and rode men around. And the day came wherein one of the stallions suggested that they change places with man. There is a story that says an unknown alien virus exists in the bloodstream of man, and that it either harms you or else helps you, based on how you feel about it. And someone will say, "But since we have no knowledge of it, how can you feel either this way or that about it?" And oh yeah, there's a third possibility of it having no effect on you, which occurs when you have no particular feeling about it, one way or the other. One man went to visit his mother, then his father, then his grandparents and all his other ancestors, and then he came back home. As per one tale, before you could graduate from a certain mystical school, you had to answer this question: after you leave, should you decide to try and pass along what you've learned here, will you try and talk to simple, instinctively driven men, or to the educated and sophisticated? And I can tell you this: if you gave the wrong reply, well, I can for sure tell you this. The primary reason that ordinary people think life so complicated and difficult to explain is because, being ordinary, they don't see how simple and straightforward it is. Okay, like this. Like what I just said is either true or not true, right? See, there you go again. There was once a planet that was so screwed up that the people there thought that 2 was a really complex and challenging number. And upon hearing this story, one man's left frontal lobe nudged his right frontal lobe and whispered, "Get a load of that crap." The proper evolution of gun control. One man shot everything he owned, then he shot himself. In the beginning, some men didn't find just being alive serious enough. So they invented religion with its ideas of sin and the resulting death that could be even more serious than one's life. But some didn't even find this sufficiently serious, so they came up with the concept of government with its taxes and military conscription, which returned being alive to the superior position of seriousness. But there were still some who found even this unacceptable, and they concocted the notion of reincarnation, whereby men were claimed to have suffered in lives previous to this one, which picture seemed to them sufficiently serious. And yet, there remains a few who find none of the above tolerably explanatory, and who each, in their own private way, have developed the ability to shoot everything they own and then to turn the gun on themselves. With the ordinary, once thought has passed through the secret neural filter and become speech, explanations turn into excuses and chances for a bullseye into schlocky consolation prizes. And now a clear, simple definition of insanity. Anyone who takes this seriously is crazy. There was once a man who made up stories, and someone asked him how he went about it, and he replied that he would start making one up and then stop when it was finished. Not unlike, he added, how he tried to live. A man once asked a mystic how to tell which parts of all this he should take literally and which parts should be analyzed metaphorically. You know, people are always asking something. To be sure he was still on course, one man would periodically call home, although never knowing exactly where he was, and ask them, "Am I still on the right track?" And they, having not the least idea, would say, "Certainly, press on." Then he, having no reason whatsoever to rely on their judgment, would. Moral? You want a moral? Okay. Never give a cow a quarter for the phone. And never let your mind try and lead you home. Look at it this way. If anybody else did know what they were talking about, why the hell would they tell you? This is precisely why bovines and sheep have such difficulty in focusing their sight. There was one man out on the road who knew where he was, but he hesitated in stopping to give others directions when they asked, for fear of getting everyone lost all over again. Why do you think they transport cattle in trucks? All ordinary minds speak of man as a physical creature who thinks, and by this approach attempt to explain man's life. Please note that it does not work, and further note that neither does anything else. On one world, the thinking beings had their minds in their feet, so it was more obvious that anywhere they stood was not the right where. Cosmically speaking, there is only one description of a proper carousel, one that's running. Earthly speaking, there is but one description of a properly functioning man, one who's frustrated. Legend says that some aliens once visited here, and rather than being surprised at man's extensive use of drugs and alcohol, were amazed that it was not even greater. Ordinary men see themselves in myths. The more conscious see themselves in the mirror. That is, if for some reason they wanted to see themselves. One man says his hesitation in leaving home is due to his fear that he'll say, "Be sure and write now." The basis for man's love of poems said and songs of lamentation is his unrealized desire to lose a certain something. A something so unexpected that his lack of realization is quite understandable. One man asked a mystic to fill in the blank in the following simile for him. Distress is to the mind as stress properly is to the body. Blank. Oh. See, even a mystic can converse with himself when he wants to. One myth says that when man got old enough to leave home, life told him, if you'll take up thinking, you'll live longer. And some years later, local conditions came across man and asked him if life's advice had proven true. And the man replied, well, since I started thinking, I got to admit that everything seems somehow kind of dragged out. A king told a prince, just as the gods have given us rulers bravery and the strength of decision making, so too have they given the common man self-pity and uncertainty. And the regent asked, which of the two do they have it in for? The special feeding of the mystical mind can be expressed in the following poem. You can eat too little and you can eat too much, but you can't eat too little. The simple look and see literal mud and physical stars, while the more sophisticated see our metaphorical Mother Earth and cosmic Father. And those who have circumnavigated the universe see mud is mud and metaphor is metaphor. And what more is there to say? There are two basic ways in which men look at the idea of the mystical path. Either that it is very ancient or that it is always new. But if you won't know the truth, both ideas are wrong. And one of those items right toward the end is a great example of how men, through criticism, miss out on seeing things that could be of, even to the ordinary, of interest, and to the few of extraordinary use. It would be easy to criticize, and for taking other approaches, I'm sure that there's been, I know, many examples where it was, I understood, that would be taken as being some sort of slam at negative artistic expressions of all forms, such as in the news it was pointing out that men have a certain love for poems sad and songs of lamentation. And it is quite easy, regardless of what you thought I may have meant in the past, but let's just take it right now. From no particular definable or easily definable position, you could easily take up an attack on all sorts of artistic expressions based on negative emotion. You can, and again, not to make fun of a particular genre, but you could pick out almost all music, all popular music. You could pick out almost all forms, all fiction, just art in general, people's everyday conversation as being extreme, blatant examples of wallowing in self-pity. I mean, it's just obvious once you look at it. It's so obvious that it's like the green dragon in whose belly you live, and never seem to take any occasion to note the lime color of the wallpaper. But you listen to people talk, listen to what your own mind is inclined to say when you're in the midst of being in the ordinary flow of traffic. And it's just a constant stream of how bad you feel. I'm getting a cold. My grandmother just died. I had a car wreck. About to lose my job. And it takes on certain pretensions when it gets into a public area, into the arts. But almost all ordinary writings, poetry and fiction, art, sometimes it's harder to just look at and see, but all you got to do is ask a critic or the artist, and he'll be glad to tell you how in some way it's a reflection of the dark night of his liver, if not soul. And it's easy to criticize that. Have I made the point? Like, it's just almost all of the world's art consists of a good country song. And I mean back when country songs were like God intended, which just brought up the idea that I could right now up the stages of criticism and use criticism. I point out that you could call all art like a real bad country song. My wife left me, my dog died, my pickup won't run, and I could use that as a metaphor to explain or to try and exemplify how bad, how negative all common art is. But I was about to throw in as a side joke when I said back when country songs were like God intended, because I could say that now country songs are not as good as they used to be. You understand? That I'm now wringing my hands over the fact that I was afraid you didn't get over. I'm now decrying the fact that old hand-wringing songs are not as bad as they used to be. Well, if you got a pocket mirror, work on it yourself. At any rate, it would be quite easy, and for other purposes, even in the context of this sort of activity, it is certainly not unexpected to mount what would appear to be an objective attack to make people see how much of their so-called verbal life, their emotional life, their thoughtful life is negative in nature. And it doesn't matter how. To be alive is almost to whine. To be alive and be ordinary. You open your mouth and you just have to watch it. You can be talking to almost anybody, all the way from a stranger to your mother, to your husband, your wife, your best friend, somebody you see every day, somebody you haven't seen in 20 years. Hello, how are you? Well, you got a cold? Well, geez. What happened to your old car? Well, you don't know what. It just goes on and on and on, and it's easy to criticize. Have we established that? Well, I hope so. How about this? What if there is a quite valid, genuine, intrinsic, non-human, that is non-psychological basis for a man's love of the negative, of sadness of all sorts? And think about sadness. That's why I, in the news item, referred to it as songs of lamentation. Almost all of the artistic forms, at least, that I'm referring to as being negative, in large part, down there in totality, have to do with sorrow over things lost. The most common and the obvious being over lost love, all the way from romantic sexual love to the lost love of your parent, of a close friend, and then down a line of a little, or to a more mundane level, things I was talking about, the loss of your pickup truck, the loss of your job. And I wasn't trying to be funny. It is, I just wanted for you to specifically realize, just think about yourself, that all of the great novels, all the great dramas, if you exclude what few that you don't see are negative in base and in execution, that they're based upon some negative emotion, the expression of some sadness. The sadness is specifically, just almost entirely, I don't know what exception you'd find to this, it's always a lamentation over a loss. Okay. What if it actually represents, or what if it represents something actual, I should say? And what if it represents not something that man has lost? I could go that route, but that's sort of a preschool version of what I was going to get at, because I could say it's things lost, such as man's naivete, man's days of simple, silent, Garden of Paradise, Garden of Eden, the times wherein he was pre-cognitive, pre-speech, but that is pretty simple. Really? Oh yeah. We'll just bypass that. Let's take it to a new level. That it is not all of his negative emotions. That just all you got to do is listen to man talk, and it's going on from person to person over the back fence, over the coffee table at Denny's, and over the span of hundreds and thousands of years in literature. It's whine, 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 cry, 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 and oftentimes under the guise, especially if it's considered now to be grand literature or grand art, under the guise that the Lamentations aspire to, if not achieve, some degree of damn near divinity. Like holy suffering. Not holy catfish or holy Batman, but a kind of divine suffering. And again, I'm not making fun of it, because if you're human and you are literate, verbal, sophisticated at all in our day and time, there's no lack of circumstances under which you could sit and read a particular poem, a piece of fiction, or 2 or 3 lines from a piece of fiction, or even a nonfiction article, somebody writing about attending his father's funeral last year and some reminiscing, that kind of thing. There's no lack of circumstances under which any ordinary sane person can sit and read how the visual sensation of light bouncing off of a piece of paper with ink on it, known as words, and to sit there and be moved to the point of crying over something written 2,000 years ago, something written this afternoon or yesterday about a contemporary loss, but it be based upon someone's loss, that is, someone else's hurt. And I don't mean in just some real simplistic, crude, sympathetic way of one wolf moaning and howling and no one pick it up. I mean, it seems to be a uniquely human experience that you feel something. You read the loss that someone else is expressing. And sometimes it's when I said that it can approach down near divine levels as people writing about their feeling of losing what they thought was, or what they have a vague sensation was, some closer connection to God, to the Supreme Being, to a better state of existence. The point, almost all art, the large part, extremely large part of human verbal intercourse, all you got to do is listen, is made up of bad news, sad gossip, whining, lamentations, and they can almost all be lumped under the general category of the bemoaning of a loss of some kind. What if the specific loss does not matter, and what if an abject criticism of this kind of human activity is misplaced, and it in fact is a very crude reflection not of something that man has lost, but rather of his unrecognized desire to lose something. But a something that is so unexpected that he is not prepared to be able to realize it. Put in simple terms, which I was trying not to do, he cannot bear to do it, which is not the right way to put it, but there is no right way. Did that make any more sense verbally? That all of the cries, all the pleas, and when I said literature, I am not excluding religious literature, the so-called holy scripts from all over the world, because it is almost entirely also made up of lamentations over loss, normally a loss of the proper connection to God, to the Godhead. It's all expressions, some of them a bit more lyrical, some a bit more poetic, some a bit more inspiring, and others less so. but they are lamentations over a loss. But rather than, as I said, I could take an easy way or a more simple way and actually talked about it to some avail, to some purpose, and say, well, that sort of expression, those kind of common expressions, lamentations over something lost, whether it be a loss of a connection, a better connection to God, or whether it simply be the loss of one's loved one, of a loved one, or loss of a love. I could have gone on with and say, well, all of those are simply metaphors, common public place metaphors over man's true loss, and then I could have gone in all sorts of ways with it, like his loss of his days of silent, pre-speech simplicity. The loss, I guess, is the literate out in the marketplace would like me to go ahead and say, the loss of innocence. And that all of his other poetic musings and lamentations of that sort are metaphors for that original loss. That's all right. But this is much deeper. That it is not a metaphorical expression of an original loss. Don't look at it from the past now. Look into the future. It is an unrealized expression on his part of his desire to lose something. Not something he's lost, but he wants to lose something. But this something, I don't know a better way to tell you. It might be worthwhile than to say so unexpected. I can do synonyms if it helps. This thing that he wants to lose, this unrealized something he wants to lose. I assume my sentence structure, I'll make it make more sense. This unrealized something that he is wanting to lose, if it was realized, if he was aware of it, if he was consciously aware of it, it would be so surprising that it would be almost unbearable if he was aware of it and still as he is. So what I'm suggesting to you, the possibility that all of these negative artistic expressions, the basis of all of his negative conversation, in other words, all the lamentations that seem to so permeate man's intellectual, artistic, verbal life, are not simply metaphors for something he lost, but are metaphors for something he wants to lose, but to something were it to be of a conscious nature, were it to be, in other words, realized rather than be unrealized, it would be so shocking. It would be so shocking if I put it in words, if that was possible to make words shocking, which I'm not going to do, because for those of you that might get something, it might ruin it. But it would prove so shocking if he was aware of it, I suggest, that is why it comes out in metaphorical terms about lamenting things that he believes, or that he says he believes he has lost. That the mind can bear the fact, as painful as it is, that your husband, wife, best friend, mother, father died, that you lost them. And after the initial shock, there's no doubt they're gone, they're not coming back, they're dead. And so men write, again, with varying degrees of sensitivity and artistic ability, they write lamentations, bemoaning the loss that's irretrievable. It is in the past. But people will continue to repeat these writings, read them 2,000 years, 3,000 years after the loss has occurred. But rather than seeing it as being some sort of metaphor for some deeper loss, rather than looking to the past for some explanation as to why men are so interested, why so much of their speech and their intellectual time is taken up by lamentations over things lost, rather than looking to the past for the cause of it. And not just the obvious one, well, what I'm lamenting is my mother died 2 years ago. Not that. But not even saying, well, all that represents is we lost our original state of grace and simplicity. Our mother didn't die. Our innocence died 10,000 years ago, a million years ago. It doesn't matter how far back you look. What I'm suggesting now is don't look back. What if this is representing? It is still, let's take it as being some sort of metaphor, but rather than a metaphor for something that cannot be expressed or men do not want to express or that they're unable unable to express that happened in the past, look in the other direction, this being the future as opposed to that. What if all of this has always been, I say always, I will throw in a metaphor, it had to be after Adam left the garden. It had to be after innocence was lost. It would have to be after man was cognitive and verbal. But sometime after that, he started writing about things lost. I can assure you that the first thing he wrote, to take the Western creative Genesis version, after Adam was gone from the garden a while, I assure you, as soon as he got his hands on a down pen and some paper and did any serious writing, the first one, you know damn well, was some sort of poem lamenting the loss of residency in the garden. Well, how could have I done this? Full of self-pity, self-condemnation. God told me not to do it. I knew better. I had fair warning. God, I had it made. I look back now, and it was paradise. And look what I've done. That's a pretty heavy burden, especially if he realized that he was the father of his race, because also, according to the story, God drove him out of the garden, and I guess just to rub, which is only God knows how to do it, rub some paprika in the wound. He told him, get out of here. You're done for. Get out of here. But then he threw out his 11 said, and by the way, the curse be upon you and all your children. Now you're going to have to work. And so there's Adam, later reflecting upon what he's done. I mean, think of the birth. It's enough that he lost paradise. He lost an effortless life, and now he's out there working. Not only that, but assuming that he was the kind of proper father he should have been, the father of the race of man, he is now also faced with the fact, I have stuck my foot in it not only for myself, but for all of my progeny. For all who come after me, they're going to suffer over it. So imagine what more impetus many would-be weekend artists feel like they never get anywhere because they didn't suffer enough as children. A few months ago, if you recall, I wrote a news story about a would-be artist that ended up suing his parents over the fact that they didn't mistreat him, and he couldn't get anywhere. So I bring that up to point out that Adam, if it is suffering that brings out the true art in an artist, Adam had the ultimate conditions of suffering. I mean, the man, I'm not here to suddenly produce anything he wrote or any picture he scribbled, but I'm telling you, whatever art he engaged in, if truly suffering makes the artist, then you got to admit, you just got to realize he was it. He fucked things up for everybody. I mean, how much more can you suffer and go, oy vey, what have I done? I mean, forget this thing that some artist up in a garret in Paris that he can't pay the rent or he can't afford cigarettes today. Think about Adam. So here we are. He would have had every right to produce, and I assure you he did. He wrote the first piece. He was the first artist, and the first art had to be a paradigm of lamentation. It had to be the ultimate country and western song, because he lost everything, not only for himself, but everybody else. So it makes perfect sense in that kind of metaphor, right? Yeah, but that's child's play. It takes an extraordinary jump to do this, but some of you look lithe enough. You got to go another direction, even from him. It's not, I'm suggesting to you, metaphors for things that have been lost or anything that has been lost. It is a reflection of a certain thing that man wants to lose, but we are not wired up at the ordinary level to be able to face up to it. Literally. I'm not overplaying it. I'm not being overdramatic. That's why I wrote the sentence in a certain way, and it may have been too convoluted, but it was on the basis that there is an unrealized something that man wants to lose, but due to its unexpected, its totally surprising nature, it is not, or it is understandable why He has not realized it. In other words, it is understandable. Let's assume that I'm giving you a good description. Take the basis that all of this, all of man's art, all of man's lamentations of something lost, all of his sadness, all of his almost entirely interest in bad news rather than good news, that all of it is based upon the fact that there is something, not that he's lost, but there is something that he wants to lose. But wired up as he is now, if he was suddenly faced, if somebody could suddenly stick their hand into his very being and pull it out and say, well, this is why you keep writing all these songs and whining about cutting yourself off from God, and how the whole stories came about of you offended the gods and they drove you. You lost your easy position. You lost paradise. You lost your true connection to creation. That's what you've done. Rather than that. And you jump into the future and see that I say it's something unrealized, because if you could pull it out and say what it is, what's driving all this is not something that you have lost in the past, but it's in man's desire to lose a certain something, but the something is so unexpected. If I could pull it out of you right now and hold it and you see what it is I'm talking about, you would go, ugh. I could over-dramatize it, or I could dramatize it more than that, but I'd have to fall down and faint or something. It is simply unacceptable. It would serve no purpose, even if I put the words on it and said it. You're wired up in such a way, ordinary people, like I say it, and you go, that's all you're talking about? Jesus, you went through all that for that? So there you go. But consider, if I am giving you a description of something in a genuine manner, consider man perceives his emotional life. Many people, they would use man's emotional life, his artistic life and all that, but amounts to his emotional life. Many people would insist, if they heard me deliver some of the comments I make about man's mind and his intellect being his singular feature, they would go, well, it's true, I guess the only man can speak on this planet, but that's not what really distinguishes them. They would want to say that it's man's emotions. It's the emotions that are singular to man that makes him indeed singular. You know, charity, even sadness. They'll begin, many people would first point out, as an example, if I say, well, what do you mean? The human emotions is what makes man singular and not his ability to think. And they'll go, well, it's his emotions. And I go, well, such as, just so I'll be sure. They go, well, many people start off with charity. And they're stuck for anything resembling a positive one after about that. They probably come up with a synonym for charity. But then if they're literate at all, by the time they do that, 2 or 3 words, they realize they have about run that game out. And they will immediately feel much more at home, have a bigger run for their money, a wider cache from which to draw by start using what description, by using what kind of emotions. Well, that's fairly common to hear men described as being in a positive manner. And somebody say, well, man's the only creature. Do you ever think about this? Man's the only animal that can cry. And people just nod their head and think, well, is that not sweet? I know it's easy to laugh at, and I could try and make it sound more sarcastic for a certain point, or I could make it sound less so. But the thing is, after they say, well, man is charitable, and that's not open to total defense, by the way, because there are other animals that show some bits of charitable behavior. Of course, then those same kind of men, they go, well, that's not charitable behavior, that's just instinctive on their part. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Humans actually are charitable, and they'll help their fellow man when there's no reason to. And somebody go, some zoologist or something say, well, by the way, they'll bring out some example of birds or primates somewhere, and that same first person will go, come on. Get real. You're talking about instinctive behavior. We're talking about humans here. Oh, sorry. Anyway, back to something serious. I didn't mean to get frivolous there. They will list, many people insist, as human emotions. That is, the emotions singular to man that makes man singular, and not simply his ability to think and to talk. But what do they use as I said, the emotions? Try it yourself. I'm not picking on anybody else. Try it yourself, and you start thinking, oh, what emotions are there that men have that no other animal seems to have? And you start it, and once you start, it's almost impossible to shut up once you get past trying to come up with something positive. You know, they might say charitable. Men can express charity. And men, they like to say, and man's the only animal that worships gods, which I'm not going into that. They use that as a positive characteristic. But after about those two, and they'll have to hem and haw, and you go, well, can you tell me more? I mean, if man's so that unique, surely more than two. And they go, oh, yeah, sure, wait a minute. And if they finally give in to the inevitable and go, well, all right, man's the only creature that can cry. And you go, okay. They suddenly feel like, it's like you're driving a sports car that you're unfamiliar with and you don't know the gear shift pattern, and you suddenly realize, oh, I got it. Because once they start on negative emotion, you can coast. Because then you can just start. Well, man's the only creature that can cry, yeah. Oh, and it has, it has pity, yeah. It has self-pity, yeah. That ever gets depressed, yeah. That ever gets apprehensive. And they just go, open up the gates. So if man's emotional life, that is defensibly also singular of what men call emotions. Let's go ahead and take that as a working proposition, since men insisted that there are emotions men have that are unique to them, and that in turn, not just his thinking ability and not just the opposable thumb, that his emotions also render him unique on this planet. If we say, okay, I'll accept that, why do not men find it strange, and I'm asking you to find it interesting, that all the emotions they mention, and you can actually strike out charitable, because I was being charitable to even include it, the emotions that they mention are all negative in nature. So if that's what distinguishes man, or if that is in fact is one of his distinguishing characteristics, don't you find it interesting enough to go, what gives? There's surely more to it than that. Of course, an ordinary man, even if they went along with my observation thus far, they'd go, well, hey, that's man for you. God made him suffer. So you can always take that way out, that life is, as that famous philosopher said, you know, however it goes, life's a bitch and then you die. That's the kind of philosophy they feel. Well, life made us suffer, so there's nothing unusual. But you have got to find it of some interest that if emotions, human emotions, are unique enough to man to render him unique, then what gives that the characteristic to render man unique is negative in nature, that seems to cause him to suffer, or at least as expressions of his suffering, and it's taken to be otherwise. It's taken to be a positive attribute. Does no one find that interesting? We don't have time to take a test or a show of hands. In fact, I can see some of you are now so depressed you probably couldn't raise your hand to answer. So, surprising how things work in life, even when life doesn't think it's working, or the people involved working for it think, well, this is not going to work. And nobody realizes you never get off the clock. Okay. If it is human emotions that are that is so much a part of man's uniqueness, then would you care to consider a story that was read tonight? It said there was once a race of creatures who lived on the surface of their world. Then as they evolved, They took a part of their existence and moved it underground and changed its name. Other than the fact that from any reasonable sequential view, that makes no sense whatsoever. What do you think, huh? They lived on the surface, but then as they evolved, they moved part of their previous life underground. Why in the hell would anybody do that? And if they did, where the hell did I get off saying as they evolved? It would sound more like as they devolved. If there's a creature, a race actually living on the surface of a planet, if they moved part of their existence underground, by every known three-dimensional line of reason, that would be devolution. Because contrary, by every human expectation, if there was a group that was evolving and they were underground, what would they do? They come to the surface. In line with the story was also the question, the rhetorical question at the end is, how can progress be both progress and non-progress? It's according to how you look at it. And how do people look at it? Well, it's according to whether you're living on the surface or living underground. And another answer is to how do people look at it. I'll tie in another story. How do people look at it is answered in the fact that that's precisely why cows, sheep, have such difficulty in focusing their sight. If you live with the collective consciousness of man, part of you lives underground, and I do not mean Freudian subconscious. Part of you lives underground, and the part of you that lives underground was originally on the surface. But now it has been not just you. It's not anything enigmatic to you. It is indigenous to all men. It is indigenous with being conscious. That part of that which was originally your existence at the surface, where you were born, you as man, has been taken underground and renamed. Fade to black.